and welcome everybody back to another episode of From the Heart. And the thing that I will be bringing you today, this tome of absolute sadness, would only be from the mind of Maxwell Prince, the man behind the Ice Cream Man series, and a franchise that we have covered so many different times on this channel. And after reading so many of these issues by this incredible writer, I really wanted to seek out more, and that is exactly what I did. I went on Amazon, I checked out every different comic book shop, and what I managed to find is Maxwell Prince's Swan songs, an absolutely incredible concept piece about endings, being the end of the world, to the end of the end of the world, to the ending of a prison sentence, all the way to the end of a marriage, and last but not least, the saddest story that I think I have ever read, the end of the sidewalk. And upon actually reading this thing for the first time, I was laying in bed, I had a nice little book light strapped to the top of this, just having the ultimate reading experience, being warm and comfy, and while this book managed to be fairly sad throughout the entire thing, really bringing it in with the ending of a marriage, actually kind of explaining the tiny little molecules that would kind of assassinate a relationship. It was really the end of the sidewalk that, got to me, the very last story in this book. And while I was sitting there in my bed, hoping that this thing would kind of come to an optimistic closing, about maybe the closures of an ending, or maybe like the beauty in it, but this is just absolutely not the case. And as I turned that last page, I knew that nightmares would ensue, alright? And that is exactly what happened. The end of a sidewalk is truly a story that just kind of takes hope and balls it up and just kind of throws it in a fire. And overall, I think Maxwell Prince's Swan songs is something that needs to be on your shelf, okay? This is an absolutely incredible little concept piece and something that I was really impressed by. And on top of all these amazing little stories, we also get artwork by a handful of different artists. Being the first story that we'll be covering today, the artist of one of my all-time favorite comic books by James Tynion, The Department of Truth, and also featuring another artist that I never thought I would see again, actually being from a comic book that I covered way in the early days of this channel, The Many Deaths of Layla Starr. And the sadness of all these different stories, as well as the closure, as well as all the different artwork kind of ensuing in this book, it really managed to be a very unique piece of literature, something that I can recommend to just about anybody, and something that truly shows me that Maxwell Prince is the best at writing any kind of short story, usually kind of picking some kind of concept and just running with it for 5 to 6 different issues. We've seen this in The Ice Cream Man, we've seen this in Haha, and now we will see this in Swan Songs, as I will attempt to kind of show you 1 or 2 different stories from this. I'm not quite sure if this is going to be in 2 separate videos or not. We will see how I feel by the end of the first story, but nonetheless, everybody, I think Swan Songs is a truly amazing comic book and something that really is going to stand the test of time, not being any kind of random superhero comic or just something that's just ultimate horror, but something that really lands itself in between everything. And the first story I'll be bringing you today would happen to be The End of the World. A very interesting story about a man who is just kind of trying to take care of his mom while she's in dialysis, while a giant clock ticks down until the inevitable nuclear holocaust, alright? And while it is a very grim story, it's also kind of beautiful in the fact that this man would go so far to give his mom a few more moments of happiness, all while everybody outside is just kind of scrambling to kind of feel anything, being completely desensitized by all the media around them, as well as the inevitable doom that is going to be crashing upon their heads. And I think it really is the perfect little introduction to this story, before you start really digging deep into that darkness that I was talking about earlier, and something that I'm very excited to be showing you all. So without a doubt, everybody, go pick this book up for yourself, and let's just sit down and enjoy this amazing story by Maxwell Prince. And to kick off this story, a glimpse of the end of the world. Before he is trampled to death by an angry mob, my therapist always used to say, "Baby steps, Brian, baby steps." Pretty bad apocalypse out there. It's always something, isn't it? Small achievable goals that, over time, can accrue into something larger and more meaningful. The atomic clock's counting down. Hogwash, ain't nothing gonna happen when it hits 0. I wouldn't be so sure, Ma. Shrink the world, he'd say, to something bite-sized, something that you can control. It's all the same to me, nuclear holocaust or kidney disease. Flip a coin and die. So when the world started ending, I picked something, a small something. Don't be so morose. Now, where do we leave off? Ah, that's right. Better Gardens magazine. Ma's favorite. It keeps her happy during the dialysis. And right off the back of the story, we can see the amazing artwork featured in the Department of Truth, Martin Simmons, showing off this bleak looking skyscraper skyscraper in the middle of an absolutely dilapidated city, as well as this doomsday clock sitting in the back of the room, slowly counting down to the end of the world. But even in this ultimate ending, we are met to a man named Brian, a man who's been taking care of his mother for a very long time, and a man who has sacrificed so much just to make her happy. And as he continues to read from this garden magazine, enunciating all these different ways to grow tulips, his mother would merely sit there and ask him if he remembers tulips, noting that everybody loves a surprise tulip. And while this all does seem very beautiful, this story really manages to show a lot of different people who are just kind of trying to avoid the inevitable end. All these people who are trying to kind of feed off the different emotions of everybody. All these people who are realizing just all the mistakes that they've ever made in their lives, as well as these giant planetary holes inside them that they will no longer even be able to try to fill. But as Brian continues to read off the last article, his mother would remark what a sweet boy he is, and how much time he has spent here just merely trying to make her dialysis appointments just a little bit more bearable. And this will never really be the goal of this story, for this young man to actually adventure out into this wasteland, into the pre-end of the world, all in order to fetch the very last gardening magazine for his mother before her inevitable end, and yet her son's inevitable end. And as she sits there smiling, Brian can only recollect that the man that he actually bought these magazines from mentioned that there would be one last magazine left. There's one more, you know. What's that? The magazine Better Gardens. There's one more issue. Fred down at the carousel called about it just before the phones went offline. Fred down at carousel. Fred's probably dead, sweetie. But what if the magazine's there, at the shop? You're talking crazy, Brian. It's Looney Tunes from my son's mouth. Daffy Duck on drugs. I'll be quick, stick to the underground, and the dope fiends won't even notice me. But it's madness out there, Brian. You'll get yourself killed, and quick. I'll get you your magazine, and we can finish this series proper. And as Brian looks out the window at the ultimate doom approaching everybody on the planet, his mother will begin to make these strange noises. Noises that might signal a more natural end for a woman so dear to him. And as this would go on, Brian would scream his mother's name and crawl over to her side. And as he holds his dying mother's hand, she would merely tell him that she is alright, that she just needs to close her eyes for a little while. And with this, Brian would find the ultimate opportunity to actually rush out into the streets, into the danger, and into the end of the world to fetch this very last garden magazine. And really, throughout this story, we are going to be seeing many references that I kind of believe to be hinting towards A Clockwork Orange, with a strange gang that would inevitably follow Brian around, literally kind of trying to steal his emotions. And with this actually showing a very realistic view of the world in times of the end. Between people just kind of sitting and staring at these TVs featuring a clock that would mark their inevitable doom, all the way to an opioid crisis that would happen down in the middle of a subway, all these different people with all these different kinds of hurt, suffering, and pain. And I think overall, Maxwell Prince, without even showing any kind of monster, without showing any kind of murder, really manages to kind of paint the blackness of our souls merely through the emotions of his characters. But with our next panel, we would see Brian leaning down to kiss his mother on the forehead before he would embark on his quest. Okay, you sleep, mama. I'll be right back in no time flat. Something small, modest goals, sensible increments, little steps. I miss my therapist. He didn't take insurance, but he was chock full of good advice. One thing he was really big on, avoiding emotional vampires, parasitic individuals who, absent of a stable sense of self, feed off your own feelings. Cry for us, my love. Show me a frowny face, a grimace, a rictus. Shed a tear, won't you, dear? Sorry, fellas, nothing to be sad about. They want it all. Like Dr. Barber said, they can't suck you dry if you don't even give them permission. Petty pincher wouldn't even furrow his brow. He was speaking metaphorically, of course, but the end of the world makes everything a little confusing. And with the first sighting of these strange individuals, these appearing psychic vampires that I never really thought would be a real thing, it is something that I only find to actually make sense towards the end of this, towards the end of the world, where everybody is so completely overwhelmed that all sense of emotion would seem to be lost more in the fact of self-preservation. But with this group and throughout this story, we would see them just trying to shed a tear, trying to get anybody to smile for them, and trying to psychically live through other people's emotions. These people so lost to themselves, but overall wouldn't really cause any real world harm to anybody. And more so, just a set of characters that I really found to be be interesting, and something that I honestly think I would like to see some sort of separate issue about what exactly would happen to these people towards the end, once we stop seeing them, and just something that I really enjoyed out of the end of the world story. But with our next set of panels, we would see Brian walking across a TV shop as all these different people are standing outside, watching the clocks tick down, and kind of explaining to themselves that by the time it hits 4, they're either going to set themselves on fire, and others just flat out not believing that anything will happen. This would seem to be a modern day Y2K, only something that would seem a lot more serious, obviously, as there's actually a countdown running nationally across the entire planet on every televised station that there is. Time sure moves quick when it's running out. The clock starts ticking backwards, and everything begins to change. One minute you're taking the subway every Monday through Friday to your cushy white-collar job, and the next, the entire underground rail system is a shantytown for opioid addicts. Folks who just want to be a little glassy-eyed when the Earth finally explodes, or achieves its final heat death, or whatever winds up happening when that clock finally hits 0. Club Oxy, I used to call it. The Fort Hamilton F-stop. Okay, so one more thing about my therapist. When I think about it in retrospect, like pre-him, getting stampeded to a pulp, I guess he was kind of a dick sometimes. In addition to all that helpful stuff, he also used to say these jerky little things like, "You're in a codependent relationship with your mother, Brian. You're sacrificing your own happiness and progress for her medical needs." And I was like, yeah doc, she's my mom. What the heck am I supposed to do? She's in renal failure, for Christ's sake. Guy made me pay out of pocket for every fucking session. And as Brian continues to recollect about this amazing therapist that he used to have, this man who was stampeded to death for whatever reason, whether it was actually trying to tell people how to live their lives or how they could kind of improve themselves to live a better life. And something that I find rather hilarious throughout this entire story is just how much to heart Brian would take this man's words and how much he really appreciates and takes to action all these different sentiments. But as this man would casually begin to walk down this opioid shantytown, this underworld and the railway station of whatever city this is, we'd be greeted to all this artwork of all these people completely and utterly lost. These people lost to addiction, to the drugs that would surround their everyday lives, and we would shortly meet somebody who isn't going to be making Brian's crossing any easier than it really needs to be. As we'd see him off in the distance shouting 15, noting the clock ticking down and beginning to confront Brian about giving him any kind of opioid that this man might have. And as Brian continues to make his way, explaining that he doesn't have anything and that this isn't what his walk is all about, that he's merely trying to fetch the last magazine on Earth for his mother, this man would ultimately pull a gun. A tramadol, hydro, whatever you got in that there pack. It's not like that. I'm just trying to get a magazine for my mom. She's got kidney disease. Fuck your mother. I'll find wherever she is and I'll chew her fingers off. Now give me something good. I mean, she's my mom and she raised me, gave me everything, and I'd do anything for her. Alright, just calm down. Just let me get it. And as we'd see Brian fishing through his bag, it would inevitably be a trick for escape, buying himself some time to brandish his own weapon and actually pulling out a hammer and decking this homeless man directly in the head. After all, this is the end of the world, and there really is no room for any kind of moral standpoint, because at this moment in time, Brian has frankly had enough. And as the man holding the gun falls to the floor, Brian would inevitably show absolutely and positively no mercy. It don't matter. Either my teeth in her neck or the big bluey. Your mom is a goner either way. Flip a coin and die. And with these final words, Brian would inevitably land the killing blow, smashing this man's head into a spaghetti-like mess. And as he continues to make his way, he would continue to think of the words of his therapist. What does codependent even mean? I'd ask Dr. Barber, but you know, my HSA is empty anyhow. And with the next couple of panels, we would see Brian finally leaving the railway station and actually coming back up to the surface with a man with a TV strapped to the front of his body, counting down yet the inevitable end of the world, explaining to himself that all along they've been being warned, and really questioning to himself that why did nobody ever listen? And while everybody in the town is kind of lost in all these terrible ideas, all these terrible thoughts of loss and regret, Brian would seemingly be not able to get caught up in any of this, and the thoughts of his therapist would once again come in and actually save this man's state of mind. This is what I'm talking about. I can't get caught up in fanaticistic thinking. It's unhealthy for me. Per what I've learned from hundreds of hours of very expensive counseling, I'm focusing now on only the small things. The flickering light of a carousel sign, the sound of loose change rattling around in my backpack. And as Brian is entering the last stages of his quest, sitting outside of the shop that would hold this last gardening magazine that he wishes to read his mother so bad, he would hear a young child crying out from an alleyway to the side. And once again, we would cross the path of these psychic vampires, only, like I said, not really causing any real world damage, and actually being something that I just find very funny, just kind of snagging people and essentially begging for them to shed a tear, or to smile for them, or just to give them any kind of emotion. As with these end times, it would seem that everybody is completely emotionally dead, just kind of waiting for the clock to tick down, and while I don't know exactly what this would cause to the mental instability of everybody in the planet, I find this group of characters just so fascinating for whatever reason. But as Brian looks over, he would think to himself that there's always something, isn't it? In leaving his quest once again to step in. What you smile for, sweetheart? A grin, a little smirk. He's just a kid, you idiots. Leave him alone, why don't you? Big hero words, a hint of sanctimony in the enunciation. Smile for me, Superman. We want to see all your teeth. How about my goddamn hammer? And as Brian pulls out this tool of destruction, we would see these psychic vampires essentially running away, not wanting to have any kind of real confrontation or to feel any kind of real pain. And this is also something that I found very funny, as they would all begin to kind of snivel away, and at least at this point, Brian has given them an emotion to experience. This being fear. A construction tool. Ouchie thing. He's stoic, dearies. Desperate for a feeling. It's pathetic. And if you don't get out of here right now, I can let you know exactly what this ouchie thing does feel like. Now, no need for violence, Poppet. An instrument with which he hits nails. I say we run, lovelies. And as these psychic vampires would run away, they would turn back at Brian and they would yell that you need therapy, buddy. Something that I just don't even know how to feel about it at this point, when these people are literally trying to steal the emotions of all these people around them, and something that once again I just find absolutely fascinating and probably my favorite part of this story. But with this young boy's emotions saved, Brian would kneel over to make sure this young child is okay. And as he would begin to explain that he needs to be careful crossing the city, that all these strange people and all these weirdos lay about every single corner, this young boy would merely say, "Sorry, mister." And with the next panel, we would see Brian's eyes shot open wide, looking down at his stomach and realizing that a knife is protruding from his body. And as he begs the question of why this little boy would do such a thing, the little boy would only go on to ask if he's kidding me, rifling through his bag and noting that the only thing in here is pennies. And with this last and final thought before Brian would actually pass out from the loss of blood, he would think to himself to add a bit of copper to the bottom of a tulip vase and watch the colors bloom. And with our next set of panels, we would once again see Brian re-emerging into reality, as he would wake up inside the carousel next to the man who his mother thought to be dead. Oh look, I saved you. Sorry about that. Fred? What? Ouch! It was the kid, wasn't it? The little runt. You're the third one he's nicked this week. Nicked? The fucker stabbed me right in the gut. Can you blame him? Little man's just trying to scrounge out some cash for his sick mom. Cancer, from what I understand. I'm telling you, Brian, you see it in high relief when the clock ticks down. Everyone's got a hole inside of them, but they don't know how to fill it. No one knows how to be okay. 7. Not such a lucky number anymore. Fred, I came all this way. Do you have it? And as Brian would stand at the end of his quest with the man that he's been seeking out this entire time, asking about all these different magazines, Fred would inevitably have no idea what he's talking about. And he'd begin to tell him that when the phone lines went down, they were one of the first stores to be utterly and completely raided. And that the only thing left that they have is gauze, hydrogen peroxide, and some stale licorice that nobody ever wanted anyways. But as we know, this is not what Brian's after, and he would merely begin to ask him about the gardening magazine. And with this little inquiry, Fred, the owner of the pharmacy, would be a little bit shocked. Magazines, huh? Magazines, he says. Now that's an entirely different story. And finally, Brian would have what he's been looking for this entire time. The only little bit of hope left in this world, this little gardening magazine that would not only bring his mother happiness, but bring Brian a sense of accomplishment. To show himself that even in the eyes of the end of the world, that even in the eyes of his mother dying of something completely separate, that he is still able to bring a little bit of happiness to people around him to himself. And like little Charlie and Willy Wonka, he would absolutely run home as fast as he possibly can with magazine in hand, not stopping for anybody in his way, all the way back to the hospital. You try to focus on the small things, but in doing so, sometimes you miss the big picture. The world's ending, and everyone's hurting. Everybody's trying to feel something unnameable, something they maybe can't even describe. It's all so little, or so big, and we can't wrap our heads around it. And that's just the thing. The tiny stuff, and the stuff that's so overwhelmingly huge. It's all bound up together, like how the forest is just a bunch of individual trees. Boo-hoo, Puppet. I think I feel sad, dearies. Me too. How lovely to be sad again. Or how a mosaic is made of little colored tiles. Take enough steps and eventually you'll reach the horizon, Brian. My therapist never actually said that, but I think he would if he was, still alive. Guy was worth every cent, all told. And as Brian burst through the hospital door and explained to his mother that he's finally back, she would call over to him that the clock has finally hit 2. And even though she doesn't really believe anything will happen when the clock hits 0, you can obviously see the terrifying unknown in her eyes. And as Brian runs over to her with magazine in hand, he would tell her to not even worry about that, holding the magazine up to her and telling her that they can finally end this proper. And as his mother looks up with hope in her eyes, she would exclaim that she never really believed him, but here he is with the magazine in hand. And as she begins to explain how happy she's feeling, Brian would inevitably cut her off. Knowing that the end of the world is just around the corner and not knowing exactly what is going to happen, he would sit down and begin to read this magazine. And something that I find so beautiful, as a young son would try to comfort his family in any way possible and just kind of ignoring the terrible truth that lies for them outside, I really do think this would be the perfect ending of this story. Readers of this magazine will be well accustomed to the fact that hydrangeas, especially the mop heads and lace caps variety, thrive especially well in serene spots full of morning sun. But did you know that you can change the colors of your already rooted hydrangea petals? Assuming you fertilize your flower beds in an organic manner, manure or compost are best, your soil should be primed for a little homemade variegation. Once the plants have exposed their radiant crowns, add a solution of 1 tablespoon aluminum sulfate mixed with 1 quart water to the soil. Now the hard part. Waiting. You can't set a clock for the miracle of nature. Everything on this earth occurs in a small, almost undetectable increments. But wait long enough, dear reader, and you'll witness an explosion of color that will bring a big, bright smile to your face. And as Brian would finish this very last article for his mother, and she would grab his wrist and ask him if he remembers hydrangeas, we would turn the page to the end of the world, as we look at this giant panel of a nuclear bomb detonating in the center of the city. And this will be the end of the very first story of this book, and something that I found very fun, very interesting, not only sad but also a bit comedic with the psychic vampires, and something that I found to be a very interesting story, something that reminds me very much so of Y2K, only with a much more non-conspiracy sense to it, as the actual TVs are literally counting down to the end times. And while I don't know if this is the best thing that you could do for the planet, I almost feel like setting a counter on such an event would only lead to mass riots, raids, murder, and all the worst things that you could possibly think of. With all these people realizing that there's essentially no boundaries on what they can and cannot do, this is the type of the end of the world that I personally hope to never see. I don't really ever want to see it coming. I kind of want it to just happen in a flash. I'm gone, and hopefully I'm along my friends, along with my family, and the doom-stricken fear will have never have really hit me. But this, sadly, everybody, is going to be the end of our story. And I think I'll pick up again in another couple of weeks with the end of the world being the story of a modern-day Genesis, actually showing a couple that would emerge from the irradiated wastelands to essentially start the next Garden of Eden, and actually kind of pulling in a little bit of a plot twist with 3 scientists also emerging off in a distant city, kind of being the next symbolic 3 wise men, the people who come to deliver gifts to Jesus Christ himself, as these 2 people would eventually go on to kind of live their own life in a perfect Eden created by themselves, eventually becoming pregnant with a baby. And by the end of the story, we'll once again see the sadness that Maxwell Prince seems to put in every single thing he writes, only in a much more fun way. And I think overall these 2 stories were probably my favorite out of the Swan songs. I think the end of a marriage, as well as the end of a sidewalk and the end of a sentence, are all very great, but these 2 managed to be just, not completely soul-crushing, and actually managing to blend a bunch of different emotions, as well as a very interesting tale. And with the end of the world, these two would actually be kind of a part of the same exact thing. But anyways, everybody, I hope you enjoyed that, and let me know down in the comments what you think. Let me know if you'll be picking up this book for yourself. I really think you should, because I think at this point, I think this is my favorite Maxwell Prince book to date. Besides, you know, some of the Ice Cream Man stuff, even though once in a while it's hit or miss. But with Swan songs, this really does manage to be a really interesting concept piece, and something that really dedicates itself to being real about each of these different endings that it's trying to depict. Between a relationship deteriorating, or a man getting out of prison only to be returned to his family and essentially forced back into crime, all the way to the end of the sidewalk, where a man would essentially begin his descent into insanity. And what that story would mainly focus on would be what happens to his family when they no longer have a father to provide for them, and all the different dark things that they would need to do, as well as the complete and utter end of any kind of normality that this family could ever have. And even though it's not even their fault, that this is all just kind of due to mental illness, it manages to really wrap itself up into one of the most sad poems, one of the most sad stories that I think I have ever read with my own eyes, and something that I feel everybody should kind of pick up. If you're into horror, if you're into some of these more indie comics, Swan Songs really does have it all. But anyways, everybody, I'm beginning to ramble, and I just want to thank you all so much. I've been recording a bunch lately, and I've been having a lot of fun. We're playing Conker's Bad Fur Day, as well as starting another little series where I go and find these really weird little horror games and the such. And I think from now on, I'm just going to kind of have fun with this channel. You are going to be seeing a lot of, you know, little experimental videos and new little series and things like that. And that's all just an attempt to avoid kind of burning myself out on editing just one format. Doing these long form edited videos and then having a little break and getting to play a little game and having a little easy editing session there, I think it's very neat. And also, I just want to say, go check out the Wood Carving Man on YouTube. It's a person that I've mentioned before on this channel, the person who does all my little wood carvings that you can see on my shelf and whatnot. I've been editing his videos and things like that, and we are trying to grow that channel as well as mine, and maybe something that you'll see me featured on later. We'll see on that, but it would be much appreciated if you could go over there and support him and his awesome wood carvings. But yes, everybody, have yourself a fantastic day, and I hope to see you on the next big episode of From the Heart. Let me know down below maybe some other stories that you'd like to see on this channel, or any questions you might have. And have yourself an absolutely fantastic day. Thank you so much all for watching.